Hello, my friends, and welcome to Postscript. It's nice to have you with us. The sun is shining here in Berkeley Springs in West Virginia, where we're coming to you with an interview today with our friend David Martin. Hello, Dave. How are you, my friend?
John, it's always good to see you. How are you?
Well, I'm quite well, thank you. It's spring is en route. It comes kind of full force tomorrow, and the temperature gets up, and so we're looking forward to that. And we've got daffodils out and all kinds of things that point to a kind of a rosy future. But who knows what in the world's coming downstream? What do you think is headed this way?
Well, John, it's fun to look at the fact that back in 2007, you and I had a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation about a world where by looking through a different window, just looking at the world through a window that was available, just nobody knew it was there, we were able to see the large scale transitions that were on the horizon. And as now history is vindicated, we've had all of the things that we forecast in that wonderful presentation unfold pretty much on time, which was which was dangerous because then you think you actually know what you're doing, which is obviously a very dangerous proposition. Um,
Every once in a while, you get lucky, you know?
yeah, who knows? Once in a while, you hit a target. But here's the thing: like then, we are seeing the unfolding of inevitabilities. I used to use the term, John, and it will only mean something to people our age and older. I used to call it the ICBM strategy, the inevitable consequence business model. And an inevitable consequence business model, like an ICBM, is a tactical weapon that says that you build a system and that system is set in motion. And the only surprise is that people don't see that the system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. That's the comedy. They tell us what the system's designed to do. They even tell us in the case of 1930s, they tell us the system is going to fail. There's going to be a date certain when the system is going to fail. And everybody had that information. But for some reason, I don't know, after a generation or two, we seem to forget the part about the assumption piece that went into the model. And we sit there and go, oh my gosh, the machine isn't working. Well, no, it's actually working exactly the way it was designed. The problem is that we've got two ontology problems inside of that observation. The first one is that we forget that there were people that made the design. And so those people operated with a set of expectations, a set of assumptions. They operated in a worldview that may or may not still have relevance, but that's the system in which they built the system. So the great news is where they came from made perfect sense to them because it made sense to them based on the insights and the perspectives they had. The second problem, and equally problematic, is that we now are judging the system as built through the lens of our system. And now we sit there going, well, oh my gosh, how could somebody put the wall there? And how could they put the girders there and the window there? Clearly, they didn't know what they should have known. Well, the fact of the matter is they didn't know what we knew, and we don't know what they knew. And what happens is that we judge systems to be either functional or dysfunctional, ironically based entirely on this near comedy of two explicit assumptions that are never rendered explicit to the whole of the system. And as a result, we're pretty convinced the wheels are falling off the bus. And the great news is they're not. I've often said apocalypses are grossly overrated. They always have been. Every apocalypse so far has been terribly overrated. I think our friend Greg Braden would agree that even when cataclysmic events happen, somehow life finds its way. So even with the asteroid strike, even with the absolute everything goes to hell in a handbasket, the amazing thing is somehow or another it works out. But where it leaves us is a beautiful place to be alive, because it turns out that everything that's happening right now was not foretold by some sort of soothsayer sitting behind a glass ball. Everything that's happening right now was foretold by the people who built the system. And so guess what? We're getting to see the fruits of the system they built.
Well, that is turning into a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty for most people. And
Yeah.
and what we're looking forward, by the way, to is you're coming to Transition Talks here in Berkeley Springs on the 12th of April. And we're going to talk about some of these kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about those? Don't give too much away, but maybe
Well,
you
I'm not
could
going to
talk.
give too much away because as I like to have props when I do things.
I
This
see.
book, which is a very heavy doorstop, and by the way, I'll have some of them when I head out there if I remember to put them in the car. Creation, Separation in the Mind: The Towers of Singularity. Um, I co-authored with Norbert Schwartzer, Bill Wisman, and me. We put this book together, and what we looked at was a way in which mathematics, and by mathematics I mean quite fundamentally math as we think of it, has framed our capacity to think about the world.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it has created a perspective that allows us, without even consideration, to think in very dualistic terms. We think of things on left and right axes. We think of things as up and down. We think of things as good and bad, right and wrong, positive and negative, all kinds of other things. But we live in this unexpected, space and time where we've decided to build a series of coordinates, and then we describe our world through that series of coordinates. Well, the comedy is that nature doesn't do that.
Yeah.
That's just not how nature works. And
No,
ironically, what happens
no,
is
no
because,
squares.
yeah, because nature doesn't work that way. What we do is we build a series of models, and those models, unfortunately, become, whether we're rendering them explicit in our conversations or not, those models become the frameworks through which we see the world. And this is quite problematic because, as you said, there's great uncertainty. And the answer is no. In fact, absolute certainty is the only thing, and we go into quite detail in the book showing that the only thing that is certain is certainty. And that's fascinating because what we know, and this is very fascinating, what we know is that the only thing that is uncertain is our shift of our observation based on the existence of this temporal moment. So what we don't know is how we're going to approach what unfolds in front of us based on what happens to us right now. As the observer of a phenomenon, we shape the experiment. And
So the whole point is to change your point of view, huh?
well, and to have the fluidity of recognizing that when
Yeah.
it looks like everything's going crazy around you,
Right.
it really
Shift.
isn't going crazy around you. It is an indictment of a perspectival rigidity that you've addressed that you can then unaddress. You can say, oh, hold on a minute. It's not making sense is not some out there phenomenon. It's not making sense is I, as the observer, as the participating observer, have built a rigid structure into which what is unfolding right now doesn't seem to make sense. And rather than blaming the outside and going, oh my gosh, the world's falling
Yeah.
apart, you sit back and say, no, what can I do to open the aperture of my perspective? What can I
Right.
do to open the aperture of my mind? How can I, as I've celebrated, John, as long as you and I have been friends, as I've celebrated about the Arlington Institute, how can we curate environments and moments in time where
Right.
we open up the aperture of conversation and we sit for a few hours on a day in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, or at downtown DC, or wherever it winds up being. We sit and we just allow our minds to go on an adventure that says, we're not going to tell you the truth. We're not going to tell you what is right and wrong. What we are going to tell you is a perspective that may just jar open one little piece of a window or a door where you go, oh, well, if I look at it that way, then I see a different reality.
Yeah.
Recognizing that reality hasn't changed. Our experience of reality has, and that's where the genius and the beauty of this experience is.
Yeah. I've always been thinking about it for quite some time now. Is expanded awareness, and it's expanded awareness about who we are and the larger environment. And
Yes.
that is the essence of, I don't call it, you call it ascension or, the evolutionary jump or whatever the terminology that you use. This is a period of time where I said your point of view. Well, it's really kind of your larger sense of how reality works and who you are and where this is going. And so this should be a very interesting talk, like all of the ones that you come and
Well,
bring.
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. We played around with, as you know, this title of Einstein's Ghost, and the reason I like to bring that up is if we think about the world that we're living in right now, we are in fact, quite ironically, still living under the hegemony of Einstein's thought. This is a very funny little principle, but the fact of the matter is most of the way we see the world, and I mean geopolitically, economically, and otherwise,
Yeah.
is derived from a series of assumptions where by fiat, not by science. And by the way, I'm sympathetic to Einstein in this moment because the fact of the matter is he warned people not to do what they did with his thoughts. So the great news is he was switched on enough to know that people were going to likely misuse them. But the problem is we have decided that things like relativity, things like space and time, things like our cosmology, these are all things that we have attributed to a series of principles and assumptions that he postulated.
Right.
And then we decided to back reality into these postulates, and we sit there going, well, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Even the guy who wrote them said, maybe we should take them with a grain of salt.
Einstein said that if there's an ether, it turns out there's ether, that all of his theories were inoperative. I mean,
Exactly right. And the bummer for him is in the book we show that unfortunately there's not only ether from an energetic standpoint, but there is from an abject measurement standpoint. We go into that in quite detail. So the comedy of this, John, is that this is probably one of those talks where I'm going to have probably as much fun or more fun than anybody in the audience. And that's because it happens to be one of those moments where I think that as humanity, sometimes we need to go into the gym and have a real workout. We have to push ourselves to go, well, math really wasn't my strong suit, or
Yeah, right.
geopolitics really isn't something I'm familiar with, or whatever we've disqualified it. And what I'm going to invite people to in this presentation is a tour de force of stretching the mind so that the rubber bands go, some pop, some stretch back, some snap back, some do the things that rubber bands are supposed to do. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is I really want to look at the fact that this idea that there's this massive uncovering of reality and there's this massive, paroxysm in our social systems that is on top of us. I'm going to suggest that we probably can have a much more level-headed approach to how we interact with the world around us and how we interact with each other. And my goal is very simple. My goal is to suggest that maybe tolerance as a human phenomenon may be the derivative of this presentation. That we may be a little more considerate to people who have different points of view. We may be a little more considerate to people who have experienced their reality in a way that is a bit more draconian or a bit more defined and shaped. And maybe what we can do at the end of this is have dialogue that we didn't have otherwise. So I think there's some social value in it, even if the math.
Well, it's a lot of practical value as well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do here, as you well know, is to try to provide a way in which people can kind of think about not only what's coming this way, but how does it change that? How do they do things differently? How do they see the world differently? And in this particular case, what I hear you saying is, what we talk a lot about is the electric universe model and Tesla and other notions that suggest that things operate in a fundamentally different way. Gravity isn't what you think it was, and so on. And these are the assumptions that you're talking about that then frame everything, build the paradigm. And we are, if nothing else, we've got to rebuild our paradigm, redesign the paradigm, see the world in a whole different way, and that's structurally and fundamental to getting from here to there, and particularly in the next couple of years. What do you think is going to happen? Yeah, come back but talk about the next couple of years, if you will.
Well, so as you know, back in 2007, I said that by 2028, we were going to hit the wall of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And lo and behold, it looks like I may have been off by 6 months. That's not bad when you're forecasting in 2007, and again in 2011, and again in 2012. And so the great news is, what we know is that the social systems that were put in place in the 1930s have come to their end. I did a workshop just about a week ago in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I did the anatomy of how the political and economic landscape changes in 2028. And by the way, that's not a forecast. That is condition of reality. The beautiful thing is this building was designed to be imploded, and it's imploding. So the great news is we know it's happening. The bad news is, like I said, many people didn't read the opening engineering report that said we're going to blow the building up in 2028. But here it is, and it's on us. And that means 18% of the liquidity of the economy is going to be immediately altered. Now, 18% of the economy immediately being altered is a shift that is larger than wartime shifts. And people need to understand that we don't have in anybody's recorded memorable life, we don't have in the United States a proxy for the event horizon that we're upon, because we have not had a single industrial erasure at the scale that this one is. Now, that comes at a very interesting time because, as you know, we have a very interesting health dynamic that's unfolding around us, which is something, as many people know, has been a significant problem. And so what we do know is that population statistics that are normative, meaning the actuarial data we use to describe how long people live and what their quality of life is and how long they're productive, those numbers all go out the window now because what we thought we knew no longer holds. We're seeing younger people getting ill and not going into work and not being part of the productive economy. We're seeing elderly people who are having a much more significant challenge with respect to how to access and manage healthcare. And so what we've got is a very interesting set of dynamics where the underlying data that we use to build any of our models no longer holds. The only thing we know is that the legacy models don't apply. What we don't know is what models do apply. What I think is interesting is that we have a political ramification of this social phenomenon, because what we see, and we're observing this in real time on a daily basis, we're watching as the social systems that we thought were this triune structure of government, where we had all of these checks and balances and we had all kinds of other things going on. The fact of the matter is those systems probably were meant and served for purpose appropriately when there were maybe 20 million people and it was largely an agrarian economy and it was largely distributed across the East Coast of the United States with some stragglers heading west. They probably don't work at 360 or 370 million people. They probably don't work in the federated way in which we've colored the map with reds and blues. And what we now have is a system where we also know that against the backdrop of the social and economic changes, the political systems as we know them must change. And they must change to a more distributed model. The fact of the matter is we have to look at the fact that reality is that states are acting more and more autonomously. They are acting more with the kind of the brazenness and or acquiescence, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But states are going to have a new role. And obviously with the economic problems coming from the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid problem, we have a very particular set of issues that are going to be quite relevant at the state level. Because when the federal government systems that were designed in the 1930s fail, states are going to likely get appropriated block grants And if you think that Social Security Administration or the Treasury Department's IRS is problematic where we have one system across 50 states, imagine 50 of those bureaucracies. Imagine 50 Social Security administrations. Imagine 50 Medicaid offices. Imagine 50 little bureaucracies in every state where all of that stuff that used to be federal government activity is done at the state level. Great news is it's a wonderful social employment program. Bad news is it's 50 bureaucracies that take the place of one. And this is where I think we're going to see, John, the friction of people's patience with transformation running into the reality of just how do I get food stamps, or how do I access healthcare, or how do I do these kinds of things. And I think what we're going to see is the political pressure that starts at the midterms, and truly starts at the midterms. I think we're going to see the midterms just a blood sport of you're either wanting to kill grandma or you're going to want to save grandma. And the Medicare, Medicaid thing is going to be a big thing. I think what Elon Musk and President Trump are doing around the Doge program is going to have some October surprise material that is going to be probably contrived as much as it's real, but it doesn't matter because it's all theater. And at the end of the day, we're going to see all kinds of waste, fraud, corruption, all kinds of messages about that. The truth is that somewhere in the middle of it, we have built a system that has failed. And what we're really doing is seeing the carrion phase of that system. The corpse is already in the ground. The birds are already eating it. So our future is really based on our ability to, first of all, recognize that these things are all anticipated. They are all real. There's nothing to fear. And we have the ability to have conversations, as we will have in Berkeley Springs, about methods and modes of adapting now so that when those ripples come, which they will, that those ripples don't destabilize us.
All right. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Martin Armstrong, who you know that I follow a good bit, his computer model, which has largely been completely accurate for 40 years, predicts that between somewhere around 2027 that the United States breaks up and it's reconstitutes in about 5 different countries in North America. What do you think about that?
Well, as you know, I find a great deal of merit in Martin Armstrong's work. I think he does a fabulous job of taking complexity and simplifying it and putting it into language that people can access. I marvel at some of the effectiveness that he has in that area. With respect to the breakup, I think we're already seeing it functionally. The question is, institutionally, how much is that going to ultimately hold? Because remember that we're going to have a significant amount of shifts in resource allocation, and that's already starting. The president just signed an executive order last week on strategic metals, mining, and energy. And the fact of the matter is we're going to see a very interesting shift from Texas to the Rocky Mountain states, specifically Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, that area. And so where this newfound energy source is going to land in terms of how we divvy up resources is not unlike what's happening in Canada right now, where the United Conservative Party of Canada is actually holding referendums on the possible statehood or independence for Alberta. That's going, and that process is actually underway. There is real conversation about Alberta doing that. In Australia, Western Australia is doing a very similar thing. It's saying, listen, we're supporting 70 to 80% of the productive economy of Australia. Why are we essentially subsidizing the rest of the country? Alberta is saying the same thing. So what we have is a world in which the resource allocation, which is actually being redistributed at the moment, that resource allocation and the social allocation are all being adjusted. And I think by 2027, that's why I said the midterms are going to be so critically interesting, because the midterms are going to be the season in which we start seeing those divides start to open up as fissures. I don't think we will have a definition of those divides completely in 2027, but I think we'll be well on the way.
The underlying cyclical behavior of about 72 different aspects, 75 maybe, of this reality
Yeah.
And it's all of these things tied together, and then
Yeah.
you generate a net solution. And that's what has made it so amazingly kind of accurate. And
Yeah.
if it turns out to be the case, then there's amazing kind of opportunity, you could look at it, for the emergence of, say, a new country that was built on another new set of principles that existed here in North America. I mean, it seems to me that we're into a space that is a rapid disruption, a ramp function
Yeah.
change from the present.
Yeah, and remember that if we think about the film I did many years ago, American Revolution, where I suggested that the United States, as we understand it now, was largely the first experiment of a nation built on a corporation. That's really the logic behind Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and it is the logic behind what ultimately became the settlement of the War of 1812. So when I use that statement, I'm actually not referencing it metaphorically. I'm referencing it in an absolute sense, historically. What I find fascinating about that, from the standpoint of where we are now, is that we may actually be witnessing the birth of America, the country. So, it wouldn't be, by the way, the first time in history where the evolution of a country in formation took several centuries. This has happened many, many, many times throughout human history. So there's nothing about this that makes it any different. It took us basically 400 years in the UK from the Magna Carta until we started getting to the Elizabethan framework of modern England and what we saw there. And so is it fair to say that it took England 400 years to become the country that we now call England? And the answer would be absolutely. Is it then any wonder that it may take us a few hundred years to figure out this thing called America? And is it interesting that we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country, but we're going to be celebrating it at a time where I'm not sure that what we're celebrating and it will be the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Which is actually a very exciting opportunity.
There are these wild cards in my terminology that are a part of this period of time that none of us have any history with. You've got stuff happening with potentially with the sun and so on, but one of the big ones is the engagement with life, off planet life, in some kind of formalized, active kind of way. I mean, what does that do to everything?
Well, I think that the alone in the universe metaphor that many people have been very comfortable living with is yet another one of the assumptions that we need to examine very carefully, because the evidence continues to mount that we are the byproduct of interaction, at least, with intelligences from across the universe. Once again, a lot of the people that you've shared with the audiences across transition talks and other places are very articulate with naming and individuating those things. For me, I just hold open a very wide aperture of going, there are energies, intelligences, all sorts of things that very much interact with our reality. What I would say is that it appears that the evidence is mounting that our unwillingness to consider the extraterrestrial intervention on this planet is now being laughably indicted with the number of things that we're uncovering through archaeology and through other places, where it's abundantly clear that there was a very interactive world, which included a very interactive cosmos that once upon a time was normal. And we decided, because we had this hegemonic view that we needed to articulate humanity, and specifically what we called then mankind, as this kind of absolute archetypal head of the organization of reality. The fact is that's been indicted in every single turn of the wheel. And what we're going to do is, I think we're going to put ourselves in a situation where we are almost invoking the resurgence and the reinvigoration of those extraterrestrial collaborations, where, whether it is perspective, whether it's awareness, whether it's energy awareness, whether it's any of those of realities, I think we're going to see the normalization of that conversation re-enter the human
Yeah.
interaction. So
Yeah.
I'm thrilled because I think that, as you know, John, I've spent a lot of time plumbing a number of depths of different realities. And what I try to do every time is go with a sense of humility, saying, I'm sure there's something out there to learn. I'm sure there's a space in which my awareness can be expanded. And in my view, I think we are going to see a reinvigoration of normal conversations where we can now have real interactions where, whether it's perspectival, whether it's identity forms, whether it's energetic forms, I think we're going to see an enormous amount of collaboration because, once again, as I said before, I think if we look at the whole of human history, we can see that this apocalyptic model that says that it's existential gain or loss is an illusion. But what we should be looking at is we should be looking at the evidence that says that it's very clear that there have been collaborations in the past. And as we open ourselves to that collaboration, not unlike any human interaction, it is more likely that we actually receive that reciprocal engagement that I think many of us would find very fascinating. And so for me, it's about making sure that you're constantly keeping an open mind, an open perspective, and most importantly, be hospitable. If something shows up, hang out, serve it coffee, have tea with it, or do whatever it likes to do, and we'll see what happens.
Well, it may not be an apocalyptic future, but it's certainly an exponential one, and we're going
That it is indeed.
And we're going to work ourselves into some new space, and it's just going to be fun to have you with us here in Berkeley Springs to talk about some of these kinds of things. And we're really looking forward to it. To our viewer friends, you can find out complete information about David's talk and our Transition Talk program at transitiontalks.org. And all of this is a product of and a process generated here at the Arlington Institute, which is arlingtoninstitute.org. And so we look forward to having you with us, Dave. Thank you very, very much. It'll be fun to have you and Kim back in town. And we'll have a great day together, and we'll look forward to seeing you.
All right, everybody, April 12th. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Berkeley Springs. Make sure you get there, and we'll see you and have a great time together. Thanks, John.
Take care. All right.